Ladies and gentlemen of the press, good morning here in Abidjan, good afternoon wherever you may be, and possibly good evening somewhere else. And thank you for accepting our invitation to this press conference. As Director Solomon Mugera had said, my name is Vincent Mehele, Secretary General of the African Development Bank Group. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Professor Kevin Orama, Chief Economist and Vice President for Economic Governance and Knowledge Management, and the gentleman who just introduced me, Mr. Solomon Mugera, Director of Communications of the bank. Solomon, I thank you and your team for organizing this traditional event. As you may be aware, the African Development Bank Group consists of a number of entities, primarily the African Development Bank and the African Development Fund, with the Nigeria Trust Fund, and as well as other trust funds forming part of the entity. The bank and the fund have separate governance organs. In other words, they have separate boards of governance as well as separate boards of directors. On the other hand, the Nigeria Trust Fund is a special trust fund of the bank and therefore does not have a separate governance organ and is overseen by the board of directors of the bank. As Secretary General of the Bank Group, I am Secretary to the respective boards of governance of the bank and the fund, as well as the boards of directors of both. It is in this capacity that I wish to share with you, the press, some pertinent information with regard to the 2024 annual meetings, which is the foremost statutory event on the governance calendar of the African Development Bank Group this year. For these particular annual meetings, we expect upward of up to 4,000 participants at the meetings. Now, I would like to go over in terms of the date and the venue of the meeting. From the 27th to the 31st of May this year, the 59th session of the Board of Governors of the bank and the 50th session of the Board of Governors of the fund will be held jointly at the Kenyatta International Convention Center in Nairobi, Kenya. Kenya was selected by the boards of governors to host the 2024 annual meetings following its expression of interest to do so, and after a determination by an evaluation mission from the bank that the country has the capacity to host the meetings. You may want to know what are the objectives of the annual meetings. The annual meetings are primarily a statutory event of the bank group. During the meetings, the boards of governors, as the heads decision-making and oversight organs of the bank and the fund, will review the annual report on the finances, operations, and other activities of the bank and the fund during the preceding financial year. The governors will then adopt resolutions on key decisions and conclusions of the annual meetings. There will also be a governors' dialogue, which will provide a platform for governors to interact and engage with the president of the bank group and senior management on issues of strategic significance to the continent and the bank. The proposed theme of the Governors' Dialogue is mobilizing the private sector to accelerate Africa's transformation. Given that this edition of the Governors' Dialogue will take place at a critical juncture when the continent continues to face a set of interlocking crises, the dialogue among various other areas will reflect on the bank group's new 10-year strategy that is aimed at accelerating Africa's transformation, explore ways in which the bank and other multilateral development banks could respond optimally to the call on them to work better together to significantly scale up resources for the sustainable development of the continent, and focus on the bank's role in mobilizing the private sector in the work of multilateral development banks within the context of the multilateral development bank's evolution for the purpose of accelerating Africa's development. One notable thing about the 2024 annual meetings is that the African Development Bank turns 60 this year, which is a very significant milestone. As you may be aware, the agreement establishing the African Development Bank was signed by member states on 4 August 1963 in Khartoum, Sudan, and the agreement came into force on the 10th of September 1964. While commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the bank will be year-long, it will commence with a short event on day 3 of the annual meetings under the theme, The African Development Bank, 60 Years of Making a Difference. Other events whose details will be announced to the public in due course are planned across the continent in the course of the year, culminating in the actual anniversary date. You may want to find out what the theme of the annual meetings this year is. The theme for the annual meetings this year is Africa's Transformation, the African Development Bank, and the Reform of the Global Financial Architecture. And this theme is set against the realization that despite a sustained economic growth over 2 decades, Africa's economic transformation remains quite incomplete. In addition to the statutory dimension of the annual meetings that I have just highlighted, the bank will organize a series of knowledge events under the above theme that I have indicated. The knowledge events will therefore explore how best to fast-track structural transformation across the continent. The events will also address the importance of a reconfigured global financial architecture as an engine for structural transformation. And of course, the Chief Economist and Vice President Rama will elaborate on the knowledge events in the course of the press briefing. Let me turn to giving you highlights of the annual meetings program. For now, I'd like to take you through the program of the annual meetings with a specific focus on the statutory aspects. The detailed program is available on the annual meetings website. I need to emphasize that all the statutory events will be closed to the public because it's business time for shareholders. On day 1, 3 of the statutory organs of the boards of governors, namely the Bureau, the Joint Steering Committee, and the Steering Committee on the Election of the President, will meet to discuss various items on the agenda. The Governors' Dialogue will be held on day 2 in 2 sessions, with the first session planned for the period 9 to 12, and the second session from 2:15 to 5:15 in the evening. The formal opening ceremony of the annual meetings will be held on day 3 from 10 to 11. And of course, the opening ceremony is open to the public. Also on day 3, the first sittings of the Board of Governors will be held from 15:30 to 18:30. During this particular session, the Board of Governors will review and, as appropriate, approve recommendations from the various subsidiary organs and adopt relevant resolutions. The second sitting of the Board of Governors will be held on day 5, which is from 11 to 1 p.m., during which the official communique and the official records of the bank will be considered and adopted by governors. Of course, that session will be followed by the closing ceremony, which will hold soon after from 1:30 to about 2:30, where there will be a ceremonial handover of the chairperson's position, chairperson of the Board of Governors position, to the next chairperson. Let me also highlight that as part of the annual meeting, there will be a series of side events on the sidelines of the annual meetings to support the major programs that are going on, in which civil society and a number of private organizations, as well as public organizations, will be holding some meetings. Now, I will call on the Chief Economist and Vice President, Economic Governance and Knowledge Management, to address you on the knowledge events, which is based on the theme of the annual teams meeting, on the theme of the annual meetings. He will be followed by the Director of Communications and External Relations, who will address you on the press events planned for the annual meeting. Following their addresses, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to welcoming you to the annual meetings in Nairobi in late May. Thank you very much.